My name is Irina Rishima, and I'm 32 years old. Even saying that out loud makes my chest feel tight, like 32 is an age where I'm supposed to have everything neatly stacked and labeled: career, family, approval. Like there should be no more nights where I sit alone in my kitchen, phone in my hand, trying to convince myself that what just happened doesn't hurt as badly as it does. But I learned how to breathe around disappointment long before I learned how to breathe for myself. From the outside, my family always looked perfect. We were the kind of people who sent glossy holiday cards, coordinated outfits, professional lighting, fake laughter captured at just the right angle. My mother loved framing those shots. "It's all about presentation," she would say, smoothing her hair before the photographer clicked the shutter. If you were scrolling past those photos, you'd think, now that is a successful family. You wouldn't notice the pattern unless you looked closely. Every story, every celebration, every proud speech at the dinner table somehow circled back to one person: my younger brother, Derek. He was the sun we were all supposed to orbit around. I was the invisible gravity, holding everything in place, making sure nothing fell apart, never being seen. I used to think it was normal, the way Mom's eyes lit up when Derek walked into a room, or the way Dad's voice shifted when he talked about him. Entire dinners would turn into monologues about Derek's goals, Derek's promotions, Derek's new car, Derek's potential. When I came home with straight A's and a scholarship offer, the response was a distracted, "That's great, honey," before they drifted back into planning Derek's weekend tournament. Years later, when I became the youngest partner at a logistics consulting firm, an industry full of men twice my age who didn't believe I belonged there, my father simply said, "Well, of course you did. You've always been the responsible one." And then he changed the subject to Derek's latest business idea, which he hadn't even started. My mother had a phrase she loved to repeat, as if it were a compliment. "You're fortunate, Irina. Success just comes naturally to your brother." Fortunate. That word felt like someone taking a pair of scissors to all my late nights and early mornings, my anxiety, my exhaustion, and throwing the scraps into the trash. There's a photo wall in my parents' den that tells the story better than I ever could. It stretches from one end to the other. Derek in his soccer jersey, Derek in his prom suit, Derek at graduation, smiling with both my parents' arms wrapped around him like he was their only child. I appear maybe 3 times. Always at the edge of the frame, half turned, half lit. Once, when I was 17, I saw a photo from Aunt Caroline's wedding on my mother's computer. I was standing right beside Derek, just as dressed up, just as present. In the framed version on the wall, my body had been cropped out completely. "Better composition," my dad explained when he caught me staring at it. "The picture looks cleaner this way." I didn't argue, I just stopped expecting to be in the frame at all. The only person who ever seemed to really see me was my grandmother, Vivian. At every chaotic family gathering, she'd eventually find her way to me, curling her soft, wrinkled hand around my arm. "Don't you worry, sweetheart," she'd whisper. "Some folks only recognize what's loud. The quiet ones, we're the ones who change the world." She'd wink like she'd shared a secret code only we understood. But favoritism doesn't explode overnight. It seeps in like water behind walls, one little leak after another until the structure starts to rot and everyone insists the house is fine, right up until the ceiling caves in. By the time Derek and I were adults, the imbalance had become its own language. When he forgot my 30th birthday, Mom laughed and said, "You know how he is. He's just scattered." When he borrowed $5,000 and never mentioned paying it back, Dad sighed. "He's still figuring things out, Irina. You were always the strong one. You understand." That was my assigned role. The strong one, the flexible one, the reasonable one, the one who would bend so everyone else could stay comfortable. And then, one deceptively ordinary afternoon, my father sent me a text that made something inside me finally snap. I was sitting at my dining table in my Chicago apartment, reviewing seating charts for my wedding reception. My laptop was open, little digital place cards neatly arranged on the screen. My my boyfriend first, then fiancé, Ethan, had just left to meet a client. I could still smell his cologne in the hallway. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dad. "Your brother's wedding is the family's priority. We won't be coming to yours." No emoji, no apology, just those words, lined up like a verdict. At first, it didn't feel real. I reread it so many times the letters blurred. "We won't be coming to yours." As if my wedding was a casual barbecue I might reschedule. As if I hadn't already sent out invitations, paid deposits, chosen a dress, imagined my father walking me down the aisle. It landed quietly. There was no dramatic music, no crashing sound, just a heavy, suffocating silence, like watching a door close in slow motion, knowing it will never open for you again. I didn't call him back. My thumbs hovered over the screen for a long time before I finally typed one word. Understood. I set my phone down and closed my laptop. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the hum of my refrigerator and the faint traffic outside. 10 days later, while my parents were busy helping Derek and his fiancée finalize details for their big Nashville wedding, my breaking point arrived, not with screaming, but with confirmation. Derek called. "Irina," he said, like everything was perfectly normal. I could hear him chewing gum through the phone. "You won't believe this. The Gibson estate had a cancellation. Same weekend as your thing, but it totally works out, right? You're in Chicago, we're in Nashville. Fate, right?" Fate. He said it like the universe had personally rearranged itself to highlight his specialness, and I was supposed to clap. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. I just listened to that wet chewing sound in my ear and felt something in me go very still. "That's great, Derek," I managed finally, keeping my voice as flat as possible. "I knew you'd get it," he laughed, full of that effortless confidence of someone who has never been told no. "You've always been the reasonable one." There it was again, the script. That evening, Mom called. Her voice had that soft, hesitant tone she used when she wanted to hurt me, but not feel guilty about it. "Sweetheart, about the wedding dates," she began. "Derek's future in-laws can only do that specific weekend. She's very sensitive about family attendance. It would mean everything if you could be flexible." Flexible. I stared at the seating chart still open on my laptop, at the tiny printed names of people I thought would be there to watch me say, "I do." "So, you want me to change my wedding date?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. I could practically hear her choosing her words. "We're just thinking it might be simpler for everyone," she said. "You're so independent, Irina. You understand these things." Simpler for everyone. Everyone except me. "You promised you'd be there," I reminded her, my throat burning. "You picked the date with me, remember?" She let out a long, weary sigh, the kind that suggested I was the one creating drama. "It's not about favorites, honey. It's just logistics." That word cut deeper than she knew. Logistics is my entire career. It's what I built my company on. Precision, planning, fairness, making sure everything and everyone is where they need to be. In my family's mouth, it became a cheap excuse for betrayal. Later that night, I called my father. "Irina," he said in the same reasonable tone he used in business meetings, "you know how your brother is. If we miss his wedding, he'll never let us live it down. You've always been the strong one. You'll understand." There it was, the expectation, wrapped in a compliment. So it's my job, again, to understand. I pressed my tongue against my teeth until I tasted metal. If I stayed on the line, I was going to say something that couldn't be unsaid. "I have to go," I murmured, and hung up. The apartment was dark now, city lights spilling in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My engagement ring caught the glow from a nearby candle, scattering fractured light across the wall. I watched the reflections and realized that was what my life had become. 1,000 pieces of myself, rearranged in ways that suited everyone but me. I had spent 3 decades bending, shrinking, softening, explaining, understanding, so they didn't have to face who they really were to me. That night, I decided to stop. I opened my laptop, but not to look at the seating chart. Instead, I clicked into a folder I kept for myself, one I'd labeled Someday. Inside was a listing I'd saved 6 months earlier, a 19th century villa in Monaco, perched on cliffs above the Mediterranean. Stone walls the color of honey, wrought iron balconies, terraces coated in wisteria, and a view of endless blue. I stared at the photos, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with something startlingly close to freedom. If they wouldn't show up for me, maybe it was time to build a life, a day, a memory that didn't need them at all. My mouse hovered over the Book Now button. I thought of Grandma Vivian's voice. Some folks only recognize what's loud. The quiet ones change the world. My hand stopped shaking. I clicked. And in that small, silent motion, my entire life split cleanly into before and after. I didn't tell my parents I'd booked a flight. I didn't tell my brother. I didn't even tell Ethan right away. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, heart beating with that restless, electric feeling you get right before a storm breaks. Chicago was gray and flat outside my windows, Lake Michigan a sheet of dull metal in the distance. My life here looked perfect on paper. Corner office, beautiful apartment, loving fiancé. But perfection feels meaningless if you're invisible inside it. By the end of that week, I was standing in an airport security line with a single suitcase and a ticket to Nice. Ethan met me at the gate before I left. His tie was crooked from a rushed meeting, his hair still damp from the rain. He pulled me into his arms without asking me to explain the entire plan again. "You're sure?" he murmured into my hair. "I'm sure," I said. "If I stay here and keep pretending this doesn't hurt, I'm going to resent everyone, including you." He pulled back, searched my face for a long moment, and then nodded. "Then go," he said simply. "Go build the version of this day that feels like yours. When it's time, I'll be there." Most men I've known would have asked for control, reassurance, a compromise. Ethan just gave me space. On the plane, as we lifted through the clouds, I watched the lights of Chicago disappear and felt something loosen in my chest. No group chat announcements, no dramatic speeches, just me, my carry-on, and a future that, for once, did not revolve around what my family wanted. Hours later, when the flight finally descended over the Côte d'Azur, the light outside the window looked different than any I'd ever seen. Softer, warmer, like someone had draped gold gauze over the entire coastline. Nice glowed below us. Pastel buildings, palm trees, the sea stretching out like glass. I picked up my suitcase, followed signs in a language I barely spoke, and rented a small white convertible from a man who kept calling me Madame Rishima with a charmingly mangled accent. The drive along the coast felt like stepping into a postcard. The road clung to cliffs, curling around the mountainside. Tiny villages clung to the rock, their terracotta roofs stacked like puzzle pieces. The Mediterranean shimmered below, a sheet of blue so impossibly saturated it felt almost fake, like someone had edited reality. By the time I turned onto a narrow lane, flanked by stone walls and olive trees, my shoulders had dropped several inches from my ears. The villa appeared slowly, like it was introducing itself. First the wrought iron gate, then the gravel drive, then the house itself, honey-colored stone worn smooth by time, balconies draped in wisteria, shutters faded to the softest shade of sea glass green. Vines crawled up the walls like delicate handwriting, spelling out a story older than any of my family's drama. I stepped out of the car and just stood there. The air smelled like lavender and salt. A woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on a linen apron. She was in her 50s, elegant but unpretentious, with dark hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck. "Irina Rishima?" she called, accent wrapping gently around my name. "Yes," I managed. "That's me." She smiled like we were old friends finally meeting in person. "I am Colette," she said, offering her hand. "I manage the property for the owners. When I saw your reservation, I told them, 'Ah, finally, someone who will see this house the way it deserves to be seen.'" Emotion climbed my throat so fast it surprised me. It was such a small thing, a stranger assuming I could see something clearly. But when you grow up being told you're fortunate instead of hardworking and strong instead of worthy, having someone trust your vision feels like a shock. Inside, the villa smelled like old stone, lemon oil, and dried herbs. The walls were thick, the ceilings high. Arched doorways opened into room after room, each one holding the kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty. On the far side of the house, French doors opened to a terrace that seemed to hover over the sea. "This is where most people choose to hold ceremonies," Colette said, stepping aside so I could walk out. The view made my breath catch. Wisteria twisted above wooden beams, shading a wide terrace paved in uneven stone. Beyond the low wall, the Mediterranean stretched out, glittering under the afternoon light. In the distance, other houses clung to cliffs, like they were afraid to fall into the water. I could picture it instantly. One long table beneath the wisteria, not a head table on a raised platform where my parents could sit like royalty. Candles in mismatched holders. Ceramic plates made by local artisans. No hierarchy. Just a circle drawn wide enough only for the people who had chosen me. "This house has seen many celebrations," Colette said quietly, "but it has been, neglected, waiting. It will be happy to have life in it again." I'd never thought of a building as something that could be lonely, but looking around, I understood exactly what she meant. "Me too," I said softly. "I've been waiting too." Over the next weeks, the villa and I were rebuilt together. I hired local craftsmen, stoneworkers, gardeners, a carpenter whose hands turned raw wood into graceful arches. The The days were filled with the rhythmic percussion of hammers and the bright cadence of Italian and French conversations drifting through open windows. Seagulls cried overhead. The sea crashed below, constant and steady. In the evenings, I sat at a small wooden table on the terrace with my notebook, designing the space where I would say my vows. I sketched layout after layout, chairs in gentle curves, lanterns hanging at different heights, a path of petals leading from the house to the edge of the terrace. No head table, no stage. Just one long, generous table where no one was more important than anyone else. At night, I fell asleep to the sound of waves instead of the buzz of my phone. When I finally video called Ethan, propping my phone against a bowl on the kitchen counter, his face filled the screen, pixelated by the weak connection, but still unmistakably his. "Okay," he said slowly, turning his head to take in the stone archway behind me. "You undersold this." I turned the camera, showing him the kitchen with its worn wooden beams, the view through the French doors, the wisteria casting soft shadows across the terrace. "This is where I want to get married," I said, "not in some hotel ballroom my parents picked for convenience." He was quiet for a moment, then he smiled. Not the polite, surface-level smile he used at networking events. The real one, the one that made his eyes crinkle. "If this is what peace looks like for you," he said, "then I don't care if we're getting married on a cliff in Monaco or in the back of a grocery store. I'm completely in." I hadn't realized how much I'd been bracing for resistance until that moment. My shoulders dropped, my throat loosened. "Thank you," I whispered. The next day, I made a decision that felt almost as radical as the plane ticket. I opened the box of my original wedding invitations, thick cream cardstock with raised gold lettering, the same style my mother had adored, and set them aside. Then I went into the small town at the bottom of the hill and bought textured handmade paper from a shop that smelled like ink and dust and possibility. I picked up dried lavender, soft ribbon, a fountain pen that left dark, steady lines instead of harsh scratches. The first new invitation I wrote was to my cousin Natalie. She'd never once forgotten my birthday in 32 years. She'd driven hours to attend my college graduation when my parents claimed they couldn't get away from work. She'd mailed me soup when I caught the flu during my first brutal year at the firm. She deserved to see me stand in the center of my own story. I wrote every word by hand. "Dear Natalie, I'm getting married on a terrace in Monaco, above the sea, surrounded only by people who have shown up for me when it mattered. I would be honored if you were one of them." I pressed a small sprig of lavender into the envelope before sealing it. The second invitation went to Grandma Vivian. I could practically hear her reaction as I wrote. By the end of the week, I'd sent a dozen invitations, not to everyone, just to the ones whose presence had never been conditional. The replies flooded in faster than I expected. Natalie called me first, her voice already thick with emotion before I even said hello. "Aunt, your mom, told everyone Derek's wedding was the main event," she said. She actually used those words. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake her. "We are done pretending this is normal, Irina. Text me every detail. We're booking flights." Her conviction hit me harder than any insult my parents had ever thrown by omission. Then came a voice message from Grandma Vivian. "My girl," she said, her voice rough with age but threaded with steel. "I have ignored too many important moments in my life. I will not ignore yours. I'll be in Monaco with bells on." By the end of that week, a group chat had formed on its own. Someone named it the Real Family Table. Photos of boarding passes and suitcases and sunset screenshots from people's windows filled my phone. For the first time I could remember, I didn't feel like I was begging anyone to show up. I felt chosen. Meanwhile, across an ocean, Nashville was humming with a different kind of preparation. In between architect meetings and menu tastings, my mother left cheerful voicemails about Derek's rehearsal dinner, the floral arches, the custom monogram on his dance floor. She didn't mention my wedding once, but when she called Grandma and got her voicemail every time, when Dad texted Uncle Raymond and got a vague prior commitments in response, when Natalie stopped answering her messages entirely. A thin crack of unease began to slither down the carefully polished image they'd spent decades maintaining. 2 weddings, 2 continents, 2 definitions of family. Only one of them would reveal what had been true all along. The morning of the weddings arrived under 2 completely different skies. In Nashville, thick humidity clung to the air like something alive. Clouds hung low and gray, and the Gibson estate, glittering with chandeliers and floral arches, felt strangely hollow beneath all its glamorous effort. The venue was breathtaking, sure, but the energy? Thin, forced, fragile. Meanwhile, in Monaco, sunlight spilled over the cliffs like liquid gold. The Mediterranean shimmered below the terrace, and the wisteria canopy cast soft purple shadows across the stone floor. My villa felt awake, alive, filled with the kind of warmth that wasn't staged or constructed, just real. I stood inside the villa's master suite, hands lightly trembling as I smoothed down my wedding dress. It wasn't extravagant, no heavy beading, no dramatic train, just simple champagne silk, fitted at the waist, soft at the shoulders, the kind of dress that moved when I breathed. Colette pinned fresh lavender into my hair, her fingers gentle. Pour la vérité et la bonne fortune, she whispered. For truth and good fortune. I smiled. I think I could really use both. Across the terrace, guests who'd flown across the world for me sat in their seats, chatting, laughing softly. Lucas strummed his guitar near the archway, playing something warm and slow. Natalie's twin daughters darted between the olive trees, white dresses fluttering like tiny birds. And then the person who mattered most, Grandma Vivian, sat in the front row, holding a small sprig of lavender she'd picked from the garden. For new beginnings, she'd said when she arrived. I stood at the French doors, hands clasped, watching everyone settle in. For once, I wasn't bracing for someone to ignore me or crop me out or forget I existed. There was no empty seat reserved for my parents. There was no expectation that they might show up. And it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It felt like peace. The Gibson Estates ballroom sparkled under towering chandeliers, but empty chairs lurked at the edges like ghosts. Mom stood near the entrance in her champagne-colored gown, forcing a bright smile at every arriving guest, her eyes flicking anxiously toward the still empty parking lot. Maybe there was traffic, Dad murmured, checking his phone for the 7th time in 10 minutes. Mom didn't answer. Derek paced in front of a wall-length mirror, adjusting his bow tie for the 4th time. "Where's Grandma?" one of the groomsmen asked quietly. "Wasn't she supposed to be here early?" Derek's jaw twitched. "She's probably running late. She knows how important today is." But there was a crack in his confidence, a small one, but it was there. The photographer circled the ballroom with careful precision, rearranging groups to make the room appear fuller. "If I could have everyone shift forward a bit," he suggested, voice polite but strained. "Yes, perfect, just like that." Mom's smile tightened. Behind her more guests whispered, several noticeable absences. Aunt Patricia, Uncle Raymond, Cousin Natalie, a dozen cousins who'd sent enthusiastic RSVPs 2 months earlier. It didn't make sense, except deep down Mom suspected exactly what was happening, and it terrified her. The ceremony began. Lucas's guitar transitioned into a soft melody, the kind that feels like sunlight turned into sound. Colette gave me a small nod, and I stepped out onto the terrace. The breeze lifted my veil. Every head turned, warm smiles, teary eyes, people who had chosen me, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, not out of tradition, but because they genuinely wanted to be here. Grandma Vivian stood first. Her eyes shone with emotion. "There's my girl," she said softly. My heart tightened. Ethan waited under the wisteria canopy, eyes full of a steady, quiet love. He looked at me like I was the only person in the world. And for the first time in my life, I believed I deserved to be seen that way. The officiant, a friend of Colette's, speaking in warm, lilting English, opened the ceremony. Love is not measured by how many are invited, but by who shows up when it matters. The words settled over me like a vow of their own. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't unfold a paper. My voice came out steady. "To everyone who shows up," I began, "this love, this moment, is for you. For those who stayed when it wasn't convenient, for the ones who didn't ask me to shrink or change or bend. Today, I stand here because of you." Natalie wiped her eyes. Grandma nodded slowly, whispering, "That's my girl." Ethan's vows were quiet, raw, honest, about seeing me, choosing me, valuing the strength I spent most of my life having to hide. When we exchanged rings, I swear the entire terrace exhaled with me. Warm applause, nothing thunderous or theatrical, just real. We walked back up the stone aisle together, hand in hand, into a shower of petals thrown by giggling children. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like arrival. At the long, lantern-lit table, we ate handmade ravioli, truffle risotto, roasted vegetables with herbs from the villa's garden. Laughter rippled down the table. Glasses clinked. The air smelled like jasmine and salt. For once, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I belonged. Halfway through dinner, Natalie leaned toward me, smirking mischievously. "It's already happening," she whispered, sliding her phone into my hands. On the screen, photos of our ceremony, the terrace glowing like a dream, Grandma Vivian raising a champagne flute, Ethan kissing my forehead, my guests laughing in golden light, all of it spreading through the extended family group chats like wildfire. My breath caught. This wasn't planned. This wasn't revenge. This was truth making its way across oceans. Derek was posing for formal portraits when one of his groomsmen froze mid-scroll. "Dude," he whispered, eyes wide, "isn't that your grandmother?" Derek grabbed the phone. There she was, in Monaco, at my wedding, laughing. He stared at the pictures, astonished, confused, then angry. Mom leaned in behind him, her voice sharp and quiet. "What is that?" Dad stepped closer, jaw tightening, as he recognized face after face. Uncle Raymond, Aunt Patricia, Natalie's twins, cousins who were allegedly too busy to fly. They weren't sick, they weren't delayed, they weren't busy. They were at my wedding. A hush fell over the ballroom. Murmurs spread. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. The illusion cracked clean in half. And for the first time in my life, my family finally saw the truth they had spent years refusing to look at. And they couldn't look away. Night fell slowly over Monaco, turning the sky shades of lavender, then rose, then deepening indigo. The terrace glowed under strands of lanterns. Music drifted softly from Lucas's guitar. Someone uncorked another bottle of wine. Laughter rolled across the garden like warm ocean air. But for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't bracing for someone to take the moment away. I felt free. I slipped away for just a minute, walking toward the cliffside edge of the property. The scent of jasmine and salt hung in the air. Behind me, Ethan and our guests laughed around the long table, glasses clinking, cutlery tapping gently against ceramic plates. The lanterns swayed in the breeze above them. My phone sat on a small table near the house, screen lighting up every few minutes with buzzing notifications. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. Dozens of them. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I stood on the edge of the terrace, sea wind lifting my veil, and looked up at the sky. There was a kind of peace in the quiet that wrapped itself around me, subtle and absolute. A peace I'd never been allowed to feel growing up, not in a house where love was rationed and attention was currency. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Ethan's voice floated from behind me. I turned. He was framed by lantern light, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. His expression wasn't worried, just attentive, present. "Everything's perfect," I said, and meant it. He reached out and brushed a stray bit of wisteria from my hair. "When you're ready," he said softly, nodding toward the buzzing phone. "Whatever's waiting there, you don't owe it your peace." He walked back to the table, leaving me with my choice. A few minutes later, when the sounds of laughter rose again behind me, I finally walked toward the small table and picked up my phone. 27 missed calls, 12 voicemails, dozens of texts. The newest voicemail was from my mother. I pressed play. Her voice exploded through the speaker, brittle and furious. "Irena, how could you do this to us? Everyone's talking about you. You blindsided us. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? The entire family thinks we abandoned you. Your brother's wedding is falling apart. Guests left. People are whispering. You've humiliated us. Call me back. Now." She hung up abruptly. I stood very still. Not one word about how happy I looked. Not one word about Ethan. Not one word asking if I was okay. Not even a question about why I'd chosen to go through with the wedding alone. Just, "How could you make us look bad?" Just, "Your brother's day is ruined." Just, "You've humiliated us." For a moment, something twisted painfully in my chest. A small part of me, the part still 17, still staring at a cropped photograph, wanted to cry. But then I looked around. The lanterns glowing like low-hanging stars. The sound of Natalie's twins giggling. The scent of lavender woven through the wisteria. The murmur of people who had actually shown up for me. And suddenly, all the things my mother said felt small, petty. They belonged to a life I finally didn't have to live anymore. I listened to the voicemail once more, then slid my finger across the screen and deleted it. It felt like cutting a thread that had been strangling me for decades. The tension inside the Gibson Estate ballroom had thickened into something almost tangible. Derek stood stiffly beside his new wife, eyes darting from phone screen to guest to his parents. "Why didn't she tell us?" he muttered. "Why would she do this on my day?" Dad rubbed his forehead. Maybe we should have asked more questions." Mom snapped her head toward him, eyes wild. Don't you dare blame this on us, she whispered harshly. She ambushed us. She wanted attention. But even her voice wavered with something dangerously close to fear. Because deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't spite, this wasn't drama, this wasn't revenge. This was consequences. The kind you never expect until they arrive all at once. Guests whispered. A few avoided eye contact with my parents entirely. When the officiant raised a glass and toasted family unity, not a single person lifted their champagne flute. The music kept playing, but everything felt off-key. And Mom, who had built her entire world around appearances, felt it cracking beneath her feet. After the meal, after the dancing, after the heartfelt toasts, the night softened into quiet conversations and clinking glassware. I helped Colette gather a few dishes, laughing when she shooed me away from the work. You are the bride, she insisted. You must enjoy every second. I think I'm still getting used to that, I admitted. She patted my cheek. You will. You deserve joy, Cher. Later, when the terrace emptied and most guests had wandered into the villa for dessert and coffee, I stepped back outside with a final glass of wine. The sea was darker now, but still restless and alive. Lanterns bobbed lightly in the breeze. The long table was scattered with dried petals, wine rings, and half-melted candles. Evidence that something real had happened here. I finally sat down at one of the chairs and let out a long, trembling breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I wasn't thinking about my brother's wedding, or my parents' anger, or anyone's judgment. I was thinking about the girl I used to be. The girl who apologized for taking up space. The girl who tiptoed around her own needs. The girl who waited, always waited, for someone to choose her. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't coming back. Not after tonight. Not after this. Not after finally seeing what it looks like to be surrounded by the right people. My phone buzzed again on the table beside me. A message. Then another. Then another. But I didn't look at them. Not yet. I wasn't done choosing myself. And I wasn't done giving this night the quiet, honest space it deserved. Tomorrow I'd listen. Tomorrow I'd respond. Tomorrow I'd face whatever needed facing. But tonight? Tonight was mine. The morning after the wedding was impossibly quiet. Not the uneasy silence I grew up with, but the soft, peaceful kind that wraps itself around you like a warm shawl. Monaco's sunlight filtered through the olive trees, scattering gold across the terrace. The air smelled faintly of lavender and sea salt. Wisteria petals from last night's celebration still lay across the stone tiles, like confetti the wind refused to sweep away. I curled my hands around a warm cup of espresso and stepped onto the terrace barefoot. The Mediterranean stretched out endlessly before me, calm and glittering. My phone buzzed again. Dozens of new notifications waited, and for the first time I felt absolutely no urgencies to open them. I sat beneath the ancient olive tree, the same one I passed on my way to the aisle, and finally scrolled to the first unanswered call from this morning. Mom. I hesitated, then pressed play. Her voice was different this time, still tense, still sharp, but layered with something else. Humiliation. Irina, she began, you have embarrassed this family. Everyone at Derek's wedding saw the photos. We were blindsided. You made us look cold and heartless. People are talking about us. A long pause. You owe us an explanation. I stared out at the water. I had spent most of my life swallowing pain because they didn't want to taste guilt. But guilt wasn't mine anymore. I let the voicemail end and scrolled to another. Dad, shorter, quieter, confused. We should talk, Irina. Your mother is upset. Maybe this all just got out of hand. Out of hand. As if the problem was exposure, not behavior. I closed my eyes, letting the sunlight warm my face. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. Just tired. Deep, bone-level tired of carrying expectations no one else ever had to lift. That's when my phone rang again, loud and insistent. Mom, this time calling live. A part of me considered letting it ring again, sending her to voicemail. But a different part, the part that had grown new roots last night, told me to answer. I pressed accept. Hello? She didn't waste a second. Irina, do you have any idea how humiliated we were last night? Half the family skipped Derek's wedding because of you. Because you ran off to Europe without saying a word. Because you made this spectacle. I didn't make a spectacle, I said calmly. You absolutely did. Everyone saw the photos. I didn't post a single one. She faltered. Well, people are sharing them. And now your brother feels betrayed. We all do. You've made us look... Look what? I interrupted softly. The line went silent. I could almost hear her breathing. Look, she finally said in a trembling voice, like we didn't care about you. And there it was. Not remorse, not reflection, not even accountability. Just fear of exposure. I leaned back against the tree trunk. I didn't make you look that way, I said quietly. I just gave people an opportunity to see the truth. The silence on her end turned icy. Then her voice snapped. You've always been so cold, Irina, so dramatic. We were just trying to keep peace in the family. Patricia. The new voice sliced through the call so abruptly that my heart stopped. Grandma Vivian. She must have been in the room with my mother. Her tone was firm, grounded, steady as stone. Patricia, she repeated, that's enough. Mom sputtered. Mom, this is between me and... No, Grandma said sharply. For 32 years, you've asked this girl to make herself smaller for your comfort, to bend so you could stay unbent, to disappear so your sun could shine. Mom! And look where it's brought you, Grandma continued, to a half-empty wedding with whispers behind your back, because people finally saw what I saw decades ago. Mom's breath hitched. Irina didn't embarrass you, Grandma said. You did that to yourselves by never showing up for her, and now that she stopped shrinking, you're calling it cruelty. Her words landed like gentle thunder. Sweetheart, she said, her voice softening as she turned her attention to me. You don't owe them your silence anymore. My throat tightened suddenly, unexpectedly, not with sadness, with relief. Real, deep, marrow-level relief. Thank you, I whispered. Always, she replied. I'll stop your mother from saying anything she'll regret. Mom tried again, weaker now. Irina, we just wanted... The line went dead. Grandma had ended the call for both of us. I set my phone in my lap and stared at it for a long time, not in shock, not in fear, in understanding. The door I'd been waiting for my entire life to open, it wasn't going to. So I'd built a new house with new doors, on a cliff above the Mediterranean, and the right people had walked through them without hesitation. Later that evening, after the villa grew quiet and the guests had gone back to their rooms, I stepped out onto the terrace alone. The long table stood empty, wine stains, dried petals, half-burned candles, a beautiful kind of aftermath. I walked to the head of the table. The seat that, for most of my life, symbolized the approval I could never earn. I pulled a small lavender ribbon from my pocket, tied it around the chair, cinched it tight. For the girl who once waited to be chosen, I whispered. The wind moved through the wisteria almost like an exhale. I sat there until the sun dipped behind the hills, the sky turning shades of violet and silver. The air was warm, quiet, peaceful. Love isn't management. Love isn't appearances. Love isn't obligation. Love is showing up. And sometimes the quietest vengeance, the one that doesn't need yelling or shaming or proving, is simply living a life full of peace. To everyone who has ever felt invisible, I murmured into the breeze, you don't need to fight for a seat at someone else's table. Build your own. The right people will find their way to it. That night, I poured a glass of local rosé, took a slow breath, and finally felt free.